Okay, people, please come. Hello, good people. I'm just really frustrated by what's going on. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm in Joburg with my family, and we had first started by trying a video streaming option where I would be live streaming and they'd be watching a different room, and then so they'd watch live but in a different room. But it seems as though that also might be contributing to the lag. So we've decided that I'm coming to the lounge and we'll sit together, and I'm kind of going to preach to you and preach to them at the same time. Yeah.
Where should I put it?
Just bring it onto this
And this
table.
one too? Okay. Yeah.
Guys. I'm actually live streaming. So back outside. Apologies for that. While they were trying to carry my brother, he fell, and so that was just a bit of a scare. Like I said, I'm in Joburg, and I'm with family, so we're going to see how we navigate this, but they're going to try and bring my brother this side. He's just got to go up some steps, and it can be troublesome because he's in a wheelchair. Session. Again, thank you for your patience. This is a very kind of frustrating man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Identifying who the Son of Man is. And he's telling us what the Son of Man came to do. In verse 45. Actually, if you look, Mark chapter 1 and verse 1, it literally says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The old line. He trying to have us understand, identify Jesus, and to know what that means. And then from there, he switches it up and says, he gave his life. And so we kind of want to focus on some of the things that we find in the first part, because that tells us a little bit more about who Jesus is, and how we relate to him. So through Mark chapter 1, you find that there's the baptism of Jesus from verses 9 to 11, the temptation of Jesus, verses 12 and 13, the beginning of his ministry. He calls disciples. He gives examples of healings and teaching. And Mark is not saying Jesus is specifically with regard to what it means that he is the Son of Man. So you have verses like Mark chapter 2 and verse 10, where Jesus said, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So you have this kind of understanding of, yes, now we know he's the Son of Man. Then what does that mean? And so here we have the ability to forgive, or the authority to forgive, the authority over the law of God. And there are other little bits and pieces that Mark kind of sprinkles over Mark chapter 2 and chapter 3 up to verse 5. And then he comes with verse 6 and says, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to kill him. So the common response, if we move into Mark chapter 3, it continues to talk about, he has various discourses about how we relate to the Holy Spirit, to Satan, how he relates to his mother and brothers, trying to say that anyone who does the Lord's work is his mother and brothers. And then we move into chapter 4, and he tells a few parables, and then the miracles start. So you've kind of got Mark setting up this Jesus as the Son of Man, as a person who we ought to behold, a person that we need to understand. And then he starts this series of stories that give us miracles that Jesus performs, but even the way he structures them is not haphazard. So you've almost got these 10 main stories, which he then mirrors against each other. To give you an example, if we were to say miracle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? But for this purposes, 10 would come in somewhere around 7. He stills the storm in the boat and he walks on water. He heals the demoniac. He heals the blind man. He heals Jairus' daughter. He heals the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. He heals the woman with a haemorrhage. He heals the deaf mute. He feeds 5,000. He feeds 4,000. So what Mark is doing in telling you these 10 stories is he's almost trying to emphasize by that if you didn't know who this guy was, this is what, not only does he feed a crowd once, he feeds it twice. Not only does he heal the daughter of the ruler of the synagogue, but he also heals the daughter of a Gentile. So this guy is very impressive. And so after Mark talks about his parables in chapter 4, we get to the story of Jesus calming the storm. Now, what's very interesting is the lady who actually wrote the Master the Tempest is Raging, Mary Ann Baker, was a Mormon woman who was commissioned by a pastor to write some songs in 1874. Now, she was an orphan. Her sister and her brother were orphans. Her parents died to tuberculosis. And her brother also was suffering from tuberculosis, a respiratory illness. Go to Florida for the funeral. But he, being Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and they said, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" So they had already resigned themselves to death. And I think that's part of the attitude that we kind of have also with this coronavirus, is we've kind of gotten to a point where, yes, there are those who hope and pray that this thing will end today. But there are many of us who when we get into difficult situations and we ask, does Jesus care? We wonder, there was a drought that came before the flooding. And so he was saying people prayed for the drought to end. Rain came. The consequences of the solution that he brought. He brought rain. Surely then the death by introducing. But first, I just want to finish the story of him calming the storm. As soon as he calms the storm, they then say in verse 41, it has been setting up. This is the Son of Man, the Son of Man, the Son of Man, the Son of Man. He starts with the story and he ends it with the disciples questioning, and who is the Gerasene demoniac, the one they call Legion, rushes to them. They get back in the boat all scared. Jesus is standing there. And the first thing this demon says is, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I rebuke you by God. Do not torment me." So the disciples don't seem to know who this guy is, but demons do. James chapter 2, verse 19. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. So the idea that there are those who need to learn what God is like does not change the fact that there are demons who know what God is like. While we question, does God care? They know he cares. They use it to their advantage. Job did not know. And Job wonders how. What's happening to me? Why is this all going haywire? So after Jesus chases out these demons, this legion of demons, into the pigs, they jump into the water and they drown. Strange fact, pigs can swim. So the fact that they drowned meant they were demon possessed. It's not that they drowned because they can't swim. And when that happened, the community that they were in, because that was a Gentile community, it was not, they were not in Jewish land at that point in time. The Gentile community came to them and told them, we don't want this guy. We don't know what you Jews want to do here. We see that you're busy destroying our farms and our livestock. Please go back. So they get back in the boat and they go back to the other side. And as soon as they arrive at the other side, and this is now the first story that we're going to deal with, Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, meets them. Now, a ruler of the synagogue would kind of be like a member of the board of the synagogue or of the temple. So you're looking at your senior pastors, you're looking at your senior elders, maybe a bishop, that level. He comes to Jesus and he says, "Have mercy on me. My daughter's dying. Please come to my home and heal her." So Jesus agrees. He obliges, who's wealthy, who has power, who is esteemed. Jairus is asking Jesus to come to his house, a dwelling place. And when Jesus finally gets to the house, he meets the mother of this child. There are servants who are also there, and he instructs the other servants must leave, but one of them must stay. He goes into this daughter's room. So she has a room, she has a bed, and she's lying there, right? So I just want to set up the picture here. This young girl, about 12 years old, has an acute illness that came quite quickly, put at the point of death, with the potential to rob her of her womanhood, that she's now going to be a woman in Jewish culture, and that is being put on hold because she's sick. Now, when you consider all of these, and that Jesus is walking in the crowd, this crowd allowed Jairus to come to Jesus, and then Jesus is going towards the place that Jairus asks him to go in order to do healing. And then you have this old woman who sees Jesus passing by in the crowd. And she reasons to herself, if only I can touch the hem of his garment, I'll be okay. And she pushes through, shuffling through the crowd, and she touches him and he stops and he says, "Who touched me?" Because I felt virtue or power leave me. And everyone's like, no, man, Jesus, there are a lot of people here in the crowd that are busy moving, bumping against you, touching you. How can you say who touched me? And he says, no, received blessing. We know that Jairus' daughter was resurrected back to life. So Jesus restores their womanhood to a young girl with no family, as opposed to having a father and a mother and even people who can serve them in the home. This is a woman who was on the street. She'd lost all of her money. She'd lost everything. This girl has a home. She has her own bed. She has her own room. This woman has had an illness for 12 years. This girl is only 12 years old. This woman spent everything she had trying to fight this illness. And this young girl has people who can fight for her while she rests in her bed, healing or trying to heal from the illness. And so you have two very different pictures of people who are both helped by Jesus. But in one case, the young girl has people even in the synagogue, the Jews, who are all there to help her get help. How often do we have people in this life who we are privileged in that we have families who care? We have church communities. We have positions in church, or we know people who have positions. We sometimes have family members or friends who are in government, people who can do things on our behalf and help us out when we're in a pinch. When we get in trouble, we can call on these people and say, hey, pastor, please pray for me. I'm going through 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you set up a cell group or a prayer group and say, hey, guys, I'm going through this. Please pray for me. You have support for your religion. You have support for your relationship with Christ. And by virtue of that relationship and that closeness, God assists and brings healing. But we mustn't forget that while they were moving with this crowd, there are others who are on the wayside. And the only access they get to Jesus is to push through all the people who are seemingly close to him. The ones who literally rub shoulders with Jesus need to move out of the way so that this poor old lady can get help. In fact, it seems as though Jesus is going towards the little girl. She's comfortable, she's in her own house, and Jesus comes to her. It makes me think of when Daniel was having a vision and he couldn't understand it. And heaven dispatched the angel Gabriel to go to his aid. But angel Gabriel met Satan and they fought. And then the archangel Michael himself came and assisted so that angel Gabriel can come to Daniel's aid while Daniel is stressed about what do these visions mean. You know how many people have whole angels, cherubim, like Gabriel, being dispatched to their help. And then there are others who you pray and it's if like nothing happens. You go through years and years of toil and trouble, years of grit and just pain and suffering as if there's no help. And you get a chance, an opportunity when the Savior passes by and you take it. And nobody helps you, nobody brings you, nobody assists you, nobody moves out of your way. People are just there, as obstacles. And you have to find just the hem of the garment, just that corner. And when you touch it, you receive your healing. These are two very different ways in which people can be blessed by God. And in both of them, he cares. In fact, when this woman touched him and he turns around and engages this woman, you can understand that Jairus might have been frustrated that I've called you to come to my house to heal my daughter. She's sick. Time is of the essence. You are stopping for this person. Who's this person even? We're not even given a name of who this lady is. And yet, when Jesus refers to her, Mark chapter 5, verse 34, he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. As if to say to Jairus, yes, I know you have a daughter, but she doesn't have parents. I will be her father. She is my daughter. And if we can't recognize that God is the father to the fatherless, the husband to the widows, sometimes we will treat people as though they're lower than us or different from us when God sees them as the same. Yes, they may not have what you have. They may not have the privilege of being in a community that strengthens their faith in God, but they have access if they will only reach out and touch his garment. It makes me think of when, in saying that in front of all the servants, he's saying, this person is under my protection because they carry this title that I have of daughter. You don't touch them. You don't mess with them. You don't tease them. You allow this person to get the blessings that I have reserved for them. And so we see these two methods or ways in which one can achieve or can get a blessing or healing from God. One, you have a strong religious community that can assist you to understand how one should approach the throne of God. And they're there to help you in your times of need. But then you have another situation of people who are on the outskirts. They're not related to anyone in the synagogue. They're not even in the crowd. In fact, the crowd passes them by. Those who walk with Jesus are walking by them as though they're not there. And the only chance that they have to get a blessing from God is to push through us, those of us in the pews, to push us out of the way so that they can touch the hem of Jesus. Jesus went to the little girl, but they have to fight to get to Jesus. And I think we ought to appreciate that struggle. But then there's another way that Jesus shows that he cares. And I think this way is a little bit more contentious. We're going to go to Mark. It's chapter 6. So there's a story of how Jesus was rejected at Nazareth. There's a story of how he sends out the 12 apostles. There's a death of John the Baptist. And then he feeds the 5,000 and walks on water. And so after he does that, they dock. But this time he then heals the sick in Gennesaret. And as we move to then chapter 7, he speaks to the Pharisees about the traditions and the commandments, the temptation to sin. He's teaching about divorce. He tells them to let the children come to him. He talks about the rich young man. So we find that there's quite a lot that Jesus goes through. But there's a point, and this chronologically is very likely at the end, right? When he's dealing with the Syrophoenician woman. Mark chapter 7, from verse 24 to verse 30. I want to read it out because there's certain things which are jarring, which we'll then deal with in discussing this third case. And this is where the title of the sermon comes from. What to do when Jesus ignores you. So it reads, Mark chapter 7, verse 24. And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know. He could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. And she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. The children's bread, the Jews' bread. And we'll see in Matthew chapter 15 from verse 21 to verse 28. You hear her calling, and she says, Jesus, she says, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus ignores her, and the disciples even go so far as to say, Ish, can't someone send this woman away? She's bothering us. And then she's called a dog by Jesus. So, verse 28, Mark chapter 7, verse 28, she answers and says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Verse 29, and he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. When we go to Matthew chapter 15 and same story from verse 21. In verse 28, Jesus says, the way Matthew portrays, he says, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." So let's look at what happened here. So the first detail we get is that Jesus left Judea again and went towards the area of Sidon, the Syrophoenicia. So Tyre and Sidon are coastal cities, and there's many prophecies that are told against them in the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And when now the way this woman's identified, she's identified as a person who's in Sidon, as a Canaanite woman or a Gentile woman who is Syrophoenician. This is very important because there are two other very notable Syrophoenician characters, women, in the Old Testament. The one is Jezebel. And Jezebel was a horrible queen. She married King Ahab. She persecuted the prophets. And it was then prophesied that she, when she dies, would be food for the dogs. And this is very likely where this term dog comes from, where Jews would call particularly Syrophoenician people dogs. So when Jesus refers to her as a dog, it's not that he's calling her personally. It's almost like he's calling her by her heritage. That because she's from Sidon, she's a woman from Sidon, she's a dog. Now, Jesus is saying this in a very strange way because he personally is not insulting her, but he is reflecting the view of the Jews of that time because of the things that Jezebel had done to the Jews way back in the day. And yet the woman responds with grace, saying, "No, no, no. Even if we are dogs, it's fine. Psalm 23, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." There are people for whom Jesus prepares a table. It's okay. There are those you give bread on top of the table. It's fine. I mean, I don't need the table. I don't need the bread. Just give me the crumbs under the table. I'm okay. And her understanding that a Jewish prophet must help a Syrophoenician woman in need is rooted in 1 Kings chapter 17 from verse 8 to verse 20. Elijah is starving, a Jewish prophet. He's starving. He's running away from Jezebel. And so God asks a woman from Sidon, a widow, if she will prepare some bread for him. Then she goes to some water and he says, "Hey, but also can you give me a little bit of bread? I'm hungry." Now she says, "I'm busy out here gathering sticks. And the reason I'm gathering sticks, I'm going to make a fire. And this fire I'm going to use to bake the last bread that I have. For me and my son, we're going to eat and then we're going to die." And he says, "No, rather give me first and then you'll see to yourself after." So this is the last of what she has. And yet she bakes for Elijah first and gives bread to the Judean prophet. Yet here we have Jesus saying, as a Jewish prophet, it's not good for me to give you bread when you're in need. So you have this strange reversal where it's almost like Jesus is acknowledging the history where the generosity of giving bread to one in need seems to go from Syrophoenicia to Judah, but it doesn't go from Judah to Syrophoenicia. And that's the hypocrisy of the Jews, is that they're very racist. The Jews that we find in the Bible are very racist people. They always think they're better. They don't mind accepting help, but they never give it. Peter was a racist until Galatians chapter 2, when Paul had to tell his face that he was doing nonsense. This is long after Jesus ascended. So when Jesus then presents this and says, I can't give you the bread that's meant for the Jews, and calls her a dog, she understands the reference of the dog to be referring to Jezebel. But she also understands that when it comes to Jewish prophets helping Syrophoenician women, Elijah ended up helping that widow when her child died. That same widow who gave him bread, when her child died, she went to Elijah and said, my child is dead, please help. He went to her house and he resurrected her child. So who is Jesus as a Jewish prophet not to help her with her daughter? You don't have to come and live in my house. You don't have to come and show me, the whole temple and give me Bible studies. But at the end of the day, I'm in need. You are going to give me my blessing. This is what the Syrophoenician woman is saying. And there's a certain level of faith where you accept the answer Jesus gives. There's a certain level of faith where you ask Jesus to help you. And then there's a certain level of faith where you tell Jesus what to do. Sometimes it's presumption, where we think we can tell Jesus or God what to do. But there's a certain level of faith where you can argue with Jesus. In the first case with Jairus, he's a servant of God. He works in the temple. Jesus obliges, goes to his place, helps him out. With the lady with the issue of blood, he calls her daughter. So we work together. The one is a child. Even if we don't work together, I will take care of you. But then there's a third level, which I argue is a little bit higher, when you're a friend of Jesus. Remember in Genesis chapter 18, from verse 16 to verse 33, when God went and visited Abraham with two angels, and then he allows the angels to continue on to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he stays talking to Abraham. And Abraham asks him, are you really going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Really, really? And he says, yeah, I'm going to destroy it. And he says, but what if there are 50 righteous people in Sodom? Then will you at least spare the city? He's arguing with God. He's saying, I hear you, but can you really destroy Sodom if there are 50 righteous people? God says, let me think. No, I can't. No. He says, okay, no, maybe they're not 50. Maybe 45. If there are 45 people righteous, then will you stay your hand and leave this? Yeah, no, 45. And he says, no, but what if it's 40? He's arguing with God. Let's not beat around the bush. He's arguing with God. Yes, he's heard God is going to deliver judgment. He's saying, no, don't do that. I know that you love righteousness. You can't destroy righteousness. So if there's righteousness in the city, please spare the city. So he's pleading with God on the basis of righteousness. He understands the plan. He understands the mission, but he also understands God's character. Moses, Exodus chapter 32, from verse 11 to verse 14. He tells God. God turns around and says, you know what? I'm just going to destroy these people. Yes, they're just giving me a headache. And then Moses says, no, God. What are the Egyptians going to say? That you took these people, you led them out into the wilderness. Why? So you can destroy them. No. I can't let people talk about you like that. No. It's fine. Don't do it. Hey, God. It even says in certain versions that God repented. Or he relented. He changed his mind because Moses asked him to. He was going to do something, but because Moses understands his character more, he defaults to the character above the command. If you go to Numbers chapter 27 and verse 7, I love this story. I recently learned about it. the daughters of Zelophehad. So their father passes away. It seems like their mother has long been dead. They don't have any brothers, so the father never had a son. And according to the inheritance rights of the Near East, as well as in Israel, you then give it to the first. You give it to the firstborn son. If there's no firstborn son, you give it to the secondborn son, or you look for a son. If there's no son, you then give the land to the brother of the deceased. Now, these daughters came to Moses and the chiefs and all these judges, and they said, no, you can't take our land. I know we're all daughters, it's fine. There's 5 of us, it's fine. But if you take our land, what are we going to have? So Moses takes this to God. It's a different issue. He takes it to God. And God says these words. It says, verse 7, and the Lord said, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. I just want to read to you what he says thereafter. Numbers chapter 27, from verse 7. The Lord says, verse 6, and the Lord said to Moses, verse 7, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. You shall give them possession of an inheritance among their father's brothers, and transfer the inheritance of their father to them. And you shall speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. And if he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he has no brothers, you shall give it to his father's brothers. And then the regular law applies. But God changed the law to put the daughters first, because they refused to see injustice on the basis of the law. They told God, no, we know you're a just God. You can't allow this. A woman, she knows that Jewish prophets help Syrophoenician women when it comes to their children. She knows that. Elijah did it, so Jesus is going to do it. When she's busy there bellowing, hey, son of David, have mercy on me, and he's ignoring her, she doesn't care. He is going to give her her blessing. Whether the disciples around her say, hey, this woman is bothering us, can't you send her away? They don't care. Jesus is going to give her her blessing. He insults her by calling her a dog. She doesn't care. Jesus is going to give her her blessing. He says, no, the bread is for those on the table. He says, I don't need the table. Take your table. I'll be under the table. Give me my crumbs. And this is the position of a friend. One who can tell you off, who knows you better than sometimes you know yourself. To tell you, you're talking nonsense now. No, you're not going there. You're not going to do that. I know you. Just relax. When you engage with Jesus, not as a servant who just takes commands, does the work, not as a child who has an inheritance, but there's still this authority issue. No, but like a friend, like Abraham, like Moses, where God says about Moses that, no, man, I talk to this man face to face, me and him. With Abraham, we're told that it was accounted to him for righteousness. James chapter 2, verse 23. And he was called a friend of God. You find him being called a friend of God in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 7. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 8. Abraham was a friend of God. And when you are a friend, you can argue. You can make your case on the basis that we share more than just polite pleasantries. And this is perhaps what we can understand when Jesus says, or when God says in Isaiah, come, let us reason together. He's not talking to servants. There are those who are fine being servants in the work of God. They don't mind just doing the work. You ask them about a religious issue, they'll just say, no, this is what the Bible says. This is what we're going to do. There are those who may not have that approach per se, but there's a certain entitlement they know that I'm a child, protect me. But then there are those who constantly engage God day by day. No, God, what's going on here? What's going on with this corona? Why must we suffer like this? You don't just resign yourself to say, we're dying, God, don't you care? You know God cares. And so you challenge him to do something. And so I'd like to look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, where Paul says, let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus. Verse 6, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. Verse 7, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Verse 8, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And so we have this appeal by Paul that we should have the mind of God, where we can deal with God as a friend, as someone we want to talk to, someone we want to enjoy, someone whose presence we want to be in. And that brings me full circle back to Mark chapter 10, verse 45. Mark's whole book is basically this statement. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. God cares. He definitely cares. Those who are servants often need indications to see if he cares. He must be walking to their house. He must be engaging them. Then you see, okay, he cares. Those who are children know he cares even if he doesn't always pay attention. But there are those, I would like to believe, of us. We know he cares because it's his character. God cannot not care. It doesn't matter what it looks like in the world. It doesn't matter what's going on. We know he cares. What we want to know is what he's going to do about our situation. And in some cases, we might tell him, no, we can't continue like this provided. When we have not had money in our bank accounts, we know how he's provided. When we've been ill to the point of death, we know how he has saved us. So when we see other people going through the same thing, no, we know that Jesus cares. He must do something. We're not trying to bribe him. We're not treating him like an ATM. We're sitting down and saying, people are suffering. Do something. And if you must do it through us, it's fine. But do something. I would hope that we not act as the disciples of Zelophehad. Let's be like Abraham. Let's be like Moses, who know the character of God. We know he cares. We know he loves. We know he's merciful. What is he going to do to be merciful to those who do not have a place to stay, who do not have work, who do not have income, who do not have transport, who do not have people to care for them, who are alone because everyone they know is living somewhere else and they are given to things of depression. Let's stop asking questions of God and start being part of the answer. He cares. Do we also care? Lastly, there's the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, or the rich man and Lazarus, in which Jesus talks of a man, Lazarus, who was sitting at the gate and dogs licked his wounds, and he got crumbs from the table of the rich man. Very similar symbolism. And yet we find that when he dies, he's found in the bosom of Abraham, whereas those who feasted on the table find themselves in hell. Psalms 23 is beautiful, but don't hold too fast to that table. The table is proof that God can provide, but it's better to be with God than to have these things. I believe, and if there are any questions, please post them. I'll answer them. But if there are none at the moment, then I will close the stream and I'll spend the rest of the day with my family. Even in the same house, we're all on our devices. Spend time finding that connection, getting to know what it truly means to be home, and know that Jesus cares. I don't see any questions, either on WhatsApp or on the live chat. So thank you for being with me and my family, who are here behind the camera that you can't see. The Mushesh family wishes you peace, love, and happiness. God bless.